Woodworkers are obsessed with getting fine, feathery shavings off their boards because these fine, feathery shavings are all anybody ever talks about. But if you're trying to do efficient hand tool woodworking, actually get something done, well, these feathery thin shavings, they're not gonna let you work quickly. Imagine I had to take 1/4 inch of thickness off this board. These paper thin shavings, man, I'm gonna be here all day. I need a completely different type of tool. I need a plane that's gonna take chips, huge, thick shavings, so I can make progress fast. These two planes look very similar, but really they couldn't be more different. This is my day-to-day jack plane, and I have it set up to do medium and fine work. It'll leave a surface, but it can also do things like level a tabletop or joint an edge. This plane takes a pretty fine shaving, pretty thin. But this plane over here is completely different. I have this plane set up with a heavily curved, cambered iron and a really wide mouth. This plane doesn't take shavings, it takes chips, big, thick pieces of wood. They're so thick, you can snap them and even hear it. A plane like this is completely different, and having a plane like this, we call it a plane for coarse work, this can unlock speed in your woodworking. Now, you don't see me use this plane too much on camera because I like to use this wooden one instead, but there really isn't a big difference between them. If you've got a medium length plane with an aggressive cambered iron and a wide open mouth, and it's for coarse work, that plane is called a foreplane, spelled F-O-R-E, and that's a contraction of the word before, because one of these planes was used before the other planes to do rough work, like taking off saw marks or rough dimensioning. Planes like this might have done 90% of the work in a traditional shop, and the finer tools only did the finer work. But as useful as these two planes are, there's actually another kind of rough work plane that you should know about, and it's pretty different. Wait for it. Pretty different, right? This is a scrub plane, and I know you're probably thinking, hey, wait a second, aren't scrub planes made of metal? Long story. Most of us have probably seen scrub planes that look like this. This is a converted smoothing plane. This was my first ever scrub plane. And Stanley also made a scrub plane, the famous number 40, that was mostly used by carpenters for trimming the edges of doors and other things where using a saw would be impractical. But Stanley didn't invent the scrub plane. We can see reference to planes like this in books going all the way back to the 1600s. And these books are very consistent. They mention the scrub plane as being short and obviously made of wood with a narrow iron, a very heavy curvature of the blade, a wide mouth, and a horn in front. So this was the plane for doing all kinds of rough work in big parts of the world for hundreds of years. Which does bring up an interesting question. How the hell could these two tools possibly do the same work in the shop? I mean, look at the difference. Look how tiny the scrub plane is. Look, it can ride piggyback on the foreplane. That's how small it is. The size difference between these tools is nothing short of hilarious, and for years I've wondered how they could possibly do the same tasks. I've been waiting for a long time to find a real continental scrub plane, something with a narrow iron, not a converted smoothing plane. And I just found one at a Midwest Tool Collectors Association meet, and it's in great shape, and this is a perfect chance to compare these two planes side by side and try to make some conclusions about them. Are they better? Is one of them better than the other? Is one of them cheaper or easier to use? There's so many good questions to ask. Sounds like a good time to me. I'm really interested in efficient hand tool woodworking, so let's test these two planes for speed. I planed 1/2 inch of material off the edge of this spruce 2x6 with the foreplane and with the scrub plane. And the difference in speed was surprising. The foreplane did that 1/2 inch of material in 1 minute and 15 seconds, but the scrub plane took a full 2 minutes to take the same amount of material off the exact same board. And I didn't really trust these results. That seemed like too much of a gap. So I ran the test again, this time in a piece of 6/4 cherry. And this time the results were more surprising. The foreplane got rid of a 1/2 inch of material in 1 minute and 35 seconds, but the scrub plane took nearly 3 minutes. And this time I made sure to do the scrub planing first. So I was already a little bit winded from that when I picked up the foreplane, and the foreplane was still twice as fast. I'm not saying this is like a perfectly scientific test or anything, but it really seems like the foreplane is faster for heavy stock removal. Now, a lot of traditions didn't use the scrub plane the way I would use the foreplane. A lot of traditions use the scrub for traversing, going perpendicular to that grain to take advantage of the wood's weakness in that direction. And man, the scrub plane is fantastic for this work. That narrow, heavily cambered iron is like a plow. It glides through the work, it takes thick chips, doesn't tear out too badly, and it lets you remove material super quickly. So the scrub plane is obviously the tool for traversing, right? Not so fast. The foreplane's actually doing a really good job traversing this board. It's taking heavy shavings, it's moving easily through the work. I'm making progress very quickly. Now, the foreplane does seem to have a limitation in traversing compared to the scrub plane. The scrub plane is so short, it registers on the work really well, even if the board is pretty narrow. The foreplane is a lot longer, so of course there's a little more tendency to kind of rock it as you go, but it doesn't take a lot of planing technique to fix that problem. You need to press down on the toe of the plane when you begin your stroke, and as you move through the stroke, you need to move the pressure to your heel. And I can just check and look at what I've been planing, and yeah, the board's pretty flat. I'm not getting a crown from riding up over it with the foreplane. The technique that you need for traversing with this, it's really just standard planing technique, and it takes just a tiny bit of extra focus to make this work just as well as the scrub plane. It kind of makes you wonder, why is the scrub plane so short? What are the advantages to that? Well, this short length is definitely good for localized planing, for getting into little areas that you couldn't reach with a bigger plane. Makes sense, right? So let me try to plane just right here on this board. Yeah, it's actually kind of amazing how well this plane works for getting into this small space. The precision is damn near surgical, and I can plane just in maybe a 5-inch section and get it a lot lower than the surrounding wood. I've just done it right here. So let's color that section in and see what happens if I try to plane the same board with my foreplane. Okay, well, this is mostly what I would have predicted. The foreplane pretty much missed that low spot that I planed with the scrub. The foreplane is long, and so it rides over the low spots and only nips off the high spots. This might sound like a bug, but I think it's more of a feature, honestly. I build furniture, and so I mostly want my boards to be straight and flat. A long plane, well, it automatically flattens your boards. In fact, I rarely use a triplane or a jointer in my work, and I think that's because I use this long wooden foreplane. By the time I'm done with my rough stock prep, my boards are pretty flat and my edges are pretty straight, and I don't need another long plane. The scrub plane can get into little localized areas, but I'm not really seeing why that's an advantage. All I did here was create a low spot, and now I'm going to have to flatten the whole rest of the board to get everything down to that low spot. Hey, and if you need to buy a foreplane or a scrub plane, check out my site, tooltrader.net. It's a platform for buying and selling vintage woodworking tools. We've got metal planes that you can convert to 4-planes or scrub planes. We've got wooden planes. We've got planes that have already been converted for rough work, so you don't have to do anything at all. And we're creating special categories just for these coarse work planes, and you're going to see them right there on the homepage when you go to tooltrader.net. When I first got my Continental scrub plane, I kind of already knew the video I was going to make. It was going to be something like, hey, if you've been using a 4-plane or a jack plane for your rough stock removal, maybe you need one of these goofy-looking European scrub planes because it does the same job, but it's smaller and lighter and easier to push. Maybe this is the ticket. I really wanted to make that video because it's great when you find new things. It's really good as a YouTuber when you can tell people, oh no, that tool you've been using, that might not be the right tool. You need this new tool. I want to say that, but I can't. I've had this in the shop for weeks. I've done the tests in this video and then a bunch of other stuff, just screwing around. And pretty much every way I test it, the 4-plane comes out better. It's easier to use. It's easier to push. It's got more mass, which gives you more inertia, so it's easier to keep it in the cut. And because it has that long sole, you get all of that automatic flattening and straightening. When I dress rough lumber with my 4-plane, it just sort of magically comes out pretty flat and pretty straight, even when I'm not really paying attention. And you don't even need a nice one like mine. This is my first ever wooden 4-plane. It's like a hilariously clapped out old wooden plane with this huge mouth. That's why I bought it for like $10. And I put a camber on the iron and started using it. It's a great 4-plane. It's not as nice as my expensive one, but it works just fine. And look, the scrub plane works too, obviously, or it wouldn't have stuck around for like 500 years. And this is part of this whole tradition of European cabinet making. European cabinet makers know what they're doing. German furniture makers know what they're doing. If they like the scrub plane, they're not wrong. But I work in more of an English/American style, and in that style, I really think the 4-plane just works better. And of course, English craftsmen had scrub planes too. They had planes just like this. In the 19th century, these planes were common in English cabinet shops. They were called Bismarcks because of the obviously German name, and they were pretty popular. And of course, English furniture makers and cabinet makers would also take old smoothing planes with really wide open mouths and make short scrub planes out of them. But then some of them would use jack planes with a cambered iron, and we could call that a 4-plane. You can use either one, but I can't get around the fact that the 4-plane, which you might also call a jack plane, is just better because my work is flatter. There's really no way around that for me. Now, if you need to make like a traveling toolkit, or you really need to save space in your tool chest, or if you're mostly a machine tool woodworker and you just occasionally need a plane for rough work, well, the scrub is remarkably compact. I do really like how small and light it is. It's very easy to use. So these are an option. I just don't know if they're really the best option. I still have to say, I think the 4-plane is the best. And if you need a 4-plane or a scrub plane, don't forget to check out my site, tooltrader.net. We're going to have a bunch of planes right there on the homepage ready to be converted as 4-planes or scrub planes. And we're going to have some tools that have already been converted, so you don't have to do anything. And of course, these videos are brought to you by my patrons on Patreon. Without them, these videos would never be possible. They're our single biggest source of support, and they get a ton of rewards. And you can check all of that out at patreon.com/Rex Krueger. We'll see you in a couple weeks with another video. Thanks so much for watching.